Hello everyone, I'm Crime Whispers. I know many of you enjoy listening to these stories as you drift off to sleep before you close your eyes tonight. Let me know in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the content. Don't forget to like and subscribe now. Let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's chilling case story. One on August 15th, 2012. A photographer from the Toronto Star made a discovery that would send shockwaves through the community near West Highland Creek Golf Course in Mississauga, Toronto. He spotted a gray plastic bag along the water's edge. The bag was stained dark red, and the foul stench leaking from it was unmistakable. The timing couldn't have been worse. Just 3 months earlier, Canada had been shaken by the gruesome dismemberment of Jun Lin, a Chinese student with the nation still on edge. The photographer didn't hesitate. He called the police immediately when officers arrived and cut open the bag. Their worst fears were confirmed. Inside was a human foot badly decomposed. From the bone structure and faint traces of nail polish, they suspected the victim was female within hours. Police mobilized 50 officers to scour the area. A 4-kilometer perimeter was sealed off around the creek, since the waterway fed into the Credit River. Divers were called in to search the depths by the following day. Their search turned up another grim discovery: the severed head of an adult woman, despite being submerged for days. Investigators quickly matched it to the foot. Meanwhile, more remains were found miles away, along the riverbank of another golf course in East Toronto. Forensic experts soon confirmed that all the pieces belonged to the same victim. The autopsy revealed a brutal murder. The victim was an Asian woman, estimated to be between 35 and 45 years old. Her skull showed over 30 wounds, evidence of a savage attack. Yet one crucial piece of her body was missing: the torso. Facial reconstruction and cross-checking missing persons reports. Police finally identified her: Guanghua Lu, a 41-year-old immigrant from Chongli, Fujian, China. Guanghua had run a massage parlor in Toronto called Please Don't Forget Me a week before her remains were discovered. Her live-in boyfriend, Ken Trotsky, had reported her missing. The couple's relationship was turbulent on July 30th. After yet another heated argument, Guanghua had moved out, though she and Ken continued to see each other occasionally. On August 10th, she left home to discuss selling her massage parlor. After that, she vanished. Her phone went silent when Ken couldn't reach her. He called her 21-year-old son, Dong Hao, urging him to contact police. The next day, authorities arrived at Ken's home to deliver the devastating news, but it wasn't Ken who answered the door. Instead, another man introduced himself: Ken's boyfriend. Yet, Ken was bisexual and had been living in a complicated 3-person relationship with both Guanghua and his male partner. As investigators tried to break the news, Ken collapsed in grief, clutching his chest. While his boyfriend tried to comfort him, detectives had little choice but to leave him with their business card and circle back. Later, their next step was to speak with Guanghua's son. Dong Hao explained that his mother had lived a complicated life. She'd been married twice before, once in China and later in Taiwan, and had 2 children from those marriages. In 2002, she and Dong Hao immigrated to Canada, where she applied for asylum, claiming she had been persecuted in China's strict one-child policy over the years. She divorced her second husband, bought property, and drifted through a string of relationships to protect her son. She often passed him off as just a tenant renting a room in her house. On the day she disappeared, she had said goodbye to both Ken and Dong Hao, mentioning she had a meeting with someone about selling her massage parlor. When police questioned Dong Hao, he admitted it wasn't unusual for his mother to disappear for a few days at a time, but what struck him as odd was how frantic Ken was about her absence. Soon after, investigators summoned Ken back in for a formal interview. A wealthy 52-year-old architect, Ken had met Guanghua 2 years earlier at her massage parlor. Their relationship was volatile, marked by heated arguments, reconciliations, and financial bargaining, though primarily gay. Ken had been drawn to Guanghu's companionship and intimacy over time. He paid off her $16,000 debt and gave her large sums of money, though he often slipped back into relationships with men, sparking explosive fights eventually. They struck a strange arrangement. Guanghua moved into Ken's villa alongside his boyfriend, on the condition that Ken invest $30,000 into her business. That business was another massage parlor, one that operated as a thinly veiled brothel. When neighbors complained and Ken's reputation was threatened, he pressured her to close it down. Another fight broke out. She stormed off, retreating to her own home the night before she disappeared. Ken visited her again. Proposing a truce, he offered money if she agreed to walk away from the parlor for good. She accepted and mentioned she would be meeting a potential buyer the next day. According to Ken, that was the last time he saw her. He and his boyfriend then drove to Port Hope, 100 kilometers away, for a gathering. During questioning, Ken revealed one final detail before her disappearance. Guanghua had talked about moving an old TV and stand from her parlor to her ex. Kushikin had mentioned that before disappearing, Guanghua was planning to move an old TV and stand to her ex, Shui Zhang. He'd met Shui once before, even without understanding Chinese. Ken could sense that Guanghua treated the man with open disdain, more like a servant than a partner. Police tracked down Shui, a 39-year-old from Shanghai, slight in build. He carried a fresh, unmistakable scar running across his forehead. With the help of a translator, Shui spoke calmly, recounting his stormy history with Guanghua. For investigators, it was like stumbling into yet another soap opera tangled with love, betrayal, and resentment. Shui's story began years earlier, once a cook on a cruise ship. He had jumped ship when it docked in Montreal, seeking asylum by claiming religious persecution. Within 2 years, he secured status in Canada and even managed to get his mother into the country on similar grounds. Eventually, he found factory work in Toronto, where he rented a room from none other than Guanghua. At that time, she was involved with another man, but soon, sparks ignited between her and Shui, and a volatile relationship took shape. Only a few months in, Guanghua claimed she was pregnant. She demanded that Shui leave his girlfriend and take responsibility. Stunned and unprepared, Shui refused. He urged her to have an abortion, but she resisted. In an effort to calm her, Shui whisked her away to New York, buying gifts and promising that he would commit to her fully. She eventually agreed to the abortion, but his promises evaporated soon after. To make matters worse, Shui discovered that the tenant in Guangwu's home was actually her son, something she had hidden from him, using his mother as an excuse. Shui broke things off. He claimed his mother would never accept a twice-divorced woman with 2 children. Their romance collapsed into bitterness, though they continued to see each other casually, trading favors and money. At one point, Guanghu even tricked Ken into believing she was traveling to China instead. She used his money to go on a trip to San Francisco with Shui. Later, when she had another falling out with Ken, she sought shelter with Shui once again. He agreed to host her during weekdays, but banned her on weekends. When his mother returned home, her disappearance fell on a Friday. Shui told police that on the evening in question, Guangwang stopped by to talk about moving the TV. They shared dinner, and afterward, he claimed he drove her back to the parlor. According to him, Ken was waiting outside to pick her up. That, he insisted, was the last time he saw her. He urged detectives to look harder at Ken, but police knew something was wrong. Ken had been in Port Hope that night, 100 kilometers away, surrounded by more than a dozen witnesses, including his boyfriend. Why was Shui trying so hard to shift suspicion? Then came a key moment. An officer suddenly asked, "What about that scar on your forehead?" Shui, who had remained composed up to that point, faltered. He muttered that he had fallen while moving furniture, but detectives weren't convinced. The wound was long and clean, far more consistent with a knife than an accidental fall. Their suspicions deepened as surveillance footage from a convenience store near Shui's home came to light the tapes, told a chilling story on the night Guanghua disappeared. Cameras captured her entering his house alongside him, but she was never seen leaving the following day. Footage showed Shui dragging a large bin out of the house, struggling to heave it into his car when he returned later. The bin was gone. Investigators seized his phone after restoring deleted files. They found erased messages tied to Hui, including one from Kent, asking if Shui knew her whereabouts. He hadn't mentioned this to detectives. They also recovered deleted photos, taken just days before Guangwu vanished. The pictures showed Shui and Guangwu smiling together, but in the background was the Credit River, the very place where her dismembered remains were later discovered. Shui had sworn he hadn't been near that area in over a decade. The evidence said otherwise 2 hours after police confiscated his phone. Officers staking out Shui's residence reported frantic activity. He and his mother were tearing up carpets, ripping out the car's trunk lining, and scrubbing the doorway with bleach. Detectives obtained a search warrant inside. The chemical smell of bleach was overwhelming in the basement. Mismatched tiles drew their attention. Lifting them revealed a dark bloodstain under luminol. The living room glowed with the traces of scrubbed-away blood in a drawer. Police found a blood-stained glove on a wardrobe. Spatter marks suggested a violent slash hand in the corner. They discovered something all too familiar, a gray plastic bag, identical to those used at the dump site. Forensic experts concluded that the weapon was likely a blade between 12 and 15 centimeters long, heavier than a steak knife, yet lighter than an axe. Investigators suspected it resembled the thick, heavy cleavers commonly found in Chinese kitchens. Inside the trunk of Shui's car, faint traces of DNA matched Guanghua. No amount of scrubbing could erase it all with mounting evidence. Police arrested Shui and charged him with first-degree murder. Then, on September 3rd, another chilling discovery surfaced: a box floating in Lake Ontario. Inside were the missing torso remains of Guanghua. Its shape and color matched the bin. Shui had been caught hauling away on surveillance footage. The evidence against him was overwhelming still. Shui refused to confess as the case moved toward trial. A shocking twist erupted on September 9th. Neighbors reported a foul odor coming from the Zhang residence. When officers entered, they found Shui's elderly mother dead. An autopsy revealed a heart attack. With his lawyer's help, Shui was briefly released to attend her funeral afterward. He stunned prosecutors by demanding to talk to their astonishment. He claimed his mother was the true killer. "My mother killed Guanghua," Shui declared. "I only dismembered the body and disposed of it. I had nothing to do with the murder." According to this new version, Guang, who had come over to discuss moving the TV, they sat down to dinner when his mother returned home. Old tensions between the two women flared into a heated argument. Shui claimed Guang, who had grabbed a knife during the fight, slashing his forehead while he went to the bathroom to bandage the wound. His mother allegedly snapped, stabbing Guanghua dozens of times in a fit of rage. Shocked and terrified, mother and son supposedly agreed to cover it up together. Prosecutors were blindsided. Until now, no one had even considered the possibility of a frail woman in her 70s committing such a brutal killing. When Shui's trial began on June 10, 2014, the courtroom buzzed with speculation. Medical experts quickly cast doubt on his story. Shui's mother, they revealed, suffered from severe heart disease. With one artery 90% blocked, she had been prescribed vasodilators to manage her condition. Could a frail, elderly woman really inflict over 40 stab wounds on a healthy woman in her 40s? Doctors found it highly unlikely. A witness further undermined Shui's claim. His mother's employer described her as meticulous but weak, hardly capable of overpowering anyone. By the third day of trial, Shui changed his story again. He now insisted that when he returned from the bathroom, Guanghua was already dead. His mother hadn't killed her. He said she had merely stabbed the body in a frenzy. Afterward, asked how Guanghua actually died, Shui shrugged. "How would I know? She was already gone when I came back." Why? Prosecutors demanded. Had he lied to police 3 times before? Shui's reply was chilling. Why should I have to tell the truth? The courtroom was stunned. The prosecution pressed forward with their case. Guanghua's arms bore 19 defensive wounds, proof that she had fought back while alive. Her skull showed 31 separate blows, suggesting an attacker who was taller, stronger, and far more dominant than Shui's elderly mother could ever have been. The scar on Shui's forehead was almost certainly the result of her resistance. Even more telling was his calculated disposal of the remains. Her head, the most important piece of evidence for determining cause of death, was dumped farthest away, a deliberate move to hinder investigators. The dump sites, prosecutors argued, were chosen with care, not at random. After 3 days of tense deliberations, the jury returned its verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. Shui Jiang was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 18 years. 7 of the 12 jurors pushed for the maximum, sentenced 25 years without parole. So disturbed were they by his lies and the brutality of the crime. The trial also heard testimony from a Chinese woman who lived upstairs from the Jiangs on the night of the murder. She recalled hearing the whine of an electric drill and the sound of heavy thuds echoing from below. The next morning, she spotted Shui's mother sweeping the stairs, her expression cold and blanca, haunting reminder of the darkness hidden within those walls. We open on the kind of neighborhood where violence feels impossible. Beverly Hills, California. Postal code 90,210, a place etched into the global imagination as the pinnacle of wealth, fame, and safety, a place where palm trees stretch toward the heavens. Mansions gleam like palaces, and even the air seems scented with prosperity. But beneath that glittering surface, one family's home became the stage for one of the most infamous crimes in American history. On the evening of August 20th, 1989, inside a $5 million mansion at 722 Elm Drive, gunfire ripped apart the illusion of perfection. When the echoes faded, the patriarch, Jose Menendez, and his wife Kitty lay brutally murdered. And what followed was a case that captivated the world, not only because of the crime itself, but because of the two unlikely killers, their own sons. This is the story of the Menendez brothers' murders. Beverly Hills, 1989. Sunday nights in Beverly Hills were quiet. Streets lined with luxury cars and manicured hedges rarely saw police sirens or flashing lights. But at 11:47 p.m., a frantic call pierced that calm. The voice on the other end of the 911 line was panicked, trembling, drenched in grief. "Someone's killed my parents." Within minutes, squad cars raced toward Elm Drive, tires screeching across pristine pavement. Officers approached the mansion cautiously, but nothing could have prepared them for what lay inside. The Menendez living room was a picture of contradiction: plush white sofas, polished tables, a chandelier casting a soft glow. Yet splashed across that elegance was Carnegie Joe's, sat slumped on the couch, his head blown open by a closer-in shotgun blast. Kitty sprawled on the floor, her body riddled with holes. Blood painted the walls, pooled on Persian rugs, and stained the marble. The brutality stunned even seasoned homicide detectives. The grieving sons outside, the Menendez brothers, 21-year-old Lyle and 18-year-old Eric, lapsed on the lawn, sobbing uncontrollably. Their cries were raw, guttural, and loud enough for neighbors to hear. Lyle clutched at officers, struggling to form words. Eric shook violently, his tears soaking his shirt. To police, it looked like the grief of two sons whose worlds had just been shattered. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no missing valuables in a neighborhood as secure as Beverly Hills. It seemed unthinkable that outsiders had stormed this fortress, but the sheer savagery of the crime suggested something personal. The victims, Jose and Kitty Menendez. To understand the impact of this case, we need to know who Jose and Kitty were. Jose Menendez was not born into wealth. He was born in 1944 in Havana, Cuba, to a prestigious family of lawyers, doctors, and athletes. His father ran an accounting firm. His mother, a decorated swimmer, had earned national recognition. For young Jose, Expectations were sky high. His family drilled discipline, toughness, and ambition into him from the start. Neighbors even nicknamed him El Pequeño Dictador, the little overlord. But the Cuban Revolution in 1959 changed everything. At just 16, Jose's family lost their fortune. They sent him to the United States to escape the turmoil. He arrived with little more than determination, living in an attic in Pennsylvania. Yet instead of breaking him, hardship fueled him. He learned English quickly, excelled in high school, and secured a swimming scholarship to Southern Illinois University. There, he met Mary Louise Kitty Anderson, a beautiful, ambitious woman with striking blonde hair and sharp intelligence. Kitty had once dreamed of becoming an actress, but after marrying Jose, her life revolved around his rising career. Jose's relentless drive paid off. He aced the CPA exam, worked his way up through corporate America, and by his mid-30s, he was already a business titan. He became an executive at Hertz, where he famously recruited football legend O.J. Simpson for commercials, a move that skyrocketed the brand. Later, at RCA Records, he signed iconic artists, building a reputation as a fearless dealmaker. By the late 1980s, Jose had it all: money, power, a mansion in Beverly Hills, and 2 sons. He expected to carry his legacy forward, but behind the closed doors of Elm Drive, the family was far from perfect. The family dynamic, friends and associates described Jose as brilliant but domineering. He demanded perfection, not only from his employees, but also from his family. He raised his sons with an iron hand, pushing them to achieve and succeed. Lyle, the elder, was expected to mirror Jose's toughness. He attended Princeton but struggled to live up to his father's towering expectations. The younger was quieter, more sensitive, and deeply anxious. He excelled in tennis but felt constantly overshadowed by Jose's demands. Kitty, meanwhile, battled depression and substance abuse. Once lively and social, she became increasingly isolated, turning to alcohol and prescription drugs to cope with the strain of her marriage and family life on the outside. They were the perfect Beverly Hills family on the inside. Tension simmered like a powder keg the night of the murders on August 20th, 1989. The Menendez family attended a movie together, Batman. Afterward, they stopped for frozen yogurt before returning to their mansion. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but once inside, chaos erupted. Prosecutors later argued that the brothers, armed with shotguns purchased days earlier, waited until their parents were seated in the den. Then they unleashed a hail of bullets. Was shot in the back of the head as he sat on the couch. Kitty tried to run, but slipped on the polished floor. The brothers fired repeatedly, so many times that witnesses described her as unrecognizable. In total, Kitty was struck 10 times. Jose's sixth, the brutality, suggested rage far beyond a simple killing. After the murders, the brothers attempted to stage an alibi. They discarded shotgun shells, changed clothes, and drove to the movies again to create the illusion they hadn't been home. Later that night, they returned to the house and called 911, performing grief for police and neighbors. The investigation: at first, police suspected organized crime. Jose had powerful business rivals, and his ruthless style could have made him enemies. Detectives explored the possibility of a mafia-style hit, but as weeks passed, inconsistencies surfaced. The brothers, once inconsolable, began living extravagantly. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on cars, jewelry, watches, designer clothes, and even a new restaurant investment. Detectives grew suspicious. If they were grieving sons, why did they seem so eager to enjoy their inheritance? A breakthrough came when Eric confided in his psychologist, Dr. Jerome Zeal, during a session. Eric allegedly confessed to the murders. Ozil's mistress later leaked the tapes to police, sealing the brothers' fate. The trial of the century, the Menendez brothers' trial, became one of the most sensational court cases of the 1990s, rivaling even the O.J. Simpson case that would follow. At first, prosecutors painted Lyle and Eric as greedy heirs who slaughtered their parents for a $14 million inheritance, but the defense unveiled a shocking counter-narrative. They claimed the brothers had been victims of years of sexual and emotional abuse at the hands of their father. They argued the murders weren't about money, but the courtroom was transfixed. The brothers wept as they described abuse, painting Jose as a tyrant who used terror to control his family. Kitty, they said, turned a blind eye, too consumed by her own addictions to intervene. The trials ended in hung juries the first time around, but during the retrial, prosecutors hammered home the evidence, the shopping sprees, the lack of immediate threat, the sheer brutality of the crime. In 1996, both brothers were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Legacy. The Menendez case split public opinion. Some saw the brothers as cold-blooded killers driven by greed. Others viewed them as tragic figures, products of a toxic household that exploded in violence decades later. Their story still resonates. Documentaries, books, and even a Netflix series revisit the saga, sparking fresh debate. Each time in prison, the brothers were separated for over 20 years, until finally reunited in 2018. Today, they remain behind bars, serving out their sentences while the world continues to debate, were they monsters or victims pushed to the breaking point? The Menendez murders were not just about the violent end of a wealthy couple in Beverly Hills. They were about family secrets, ambition, trauma, and the blurred line between victim and perpetrator. In the end, 2 parents were dead, 2 sons were condemned to spend their lives behind bars, and America was left with one of its most haunting questions. What really happened behind the closed doors of Elm Drive? The illusion of perfection to the outside world. The Menendez family embodied the American dream, an immigrant dynasty that had climbed from obscurity to wealth through grit and cunning. A father who was a legendary businessman, a mother who played the loyal partner to sons, destined for Ivy League greatness. Lyle, bound for Princeton, and Eric, eyeing Stanford. They were the envy of their peers, the kind of family whose glossy facade belonged on magazine covers. But behind the gates of 722 Elm Drive, that dream was rotting from within, and soon, the decay would burst into the open in the ugliest way imaginable. When Jose and Kitty Menendez were gunned down in their Beverly Hills mansion, police immediately suspected revenge. Jose's ruthless climb to the top had earned him plenty of enemies, and his sons fueled that theory. Both Lyle and Eric insisted the mafia must have been involved. Eric even named a suspect, Noel Bloom, a California entertainment executive with alleged gang ties, claiming Bloom had clashed bitterly with Jose over a business deal, fearing they'd be the next targets. The brothers checked into a luxury hotel under full security detail. Their father's former company footed the bill: lavish suites, chauffeured limousines, and private guards shadowing their every move. But something about this picture didn't sit right. Why? Police looked the other way. In most domestic murder cases, investigators first look at those closest to the victims. Statistics show that over 90% of home murders are committed by family members or acquaintances. Why didn't detectives immediately turn their gaze toward the Menendez brothers? 2 reasons. First, their performance at the crime scene was unforgettable. Their raw sobbing and panicked 911 call looked authentic, convincing even hardened officers that these were devastated sons, not cold-blooded killers. Second, the question of motive. What reason could these privileged young men have? Killing their parents would be like burning their own golden ticket. Lyle and Eric had everything: wealth, opportunity, and status. But then came a twist. No one expected the spending spree. Most grieving children spiral into mourning. But the Menendez brothers acted as though they'd hit the jackpot just days after the murders. Eric dropped out of school, abandoning his Stanford ambitions instead. He began pouring $50,000 a year into private tennis coaching, chasing a pipe dream of going pro. Lyle, meanwhile, splurged on a Rolex, a Porsche, and designer suits, flaunting wealth with reckless abandon. Together, They invested $50,000 into a struggling restaurant valued at less than $200, an absurd move for a seasoned businessman, but one that screamed of young men flush with fresh cash. This wasn't quiet grief, it was a full-blown spending spree, dripping with the arrogance of newfound freedom. The sudden shift in behavior jolted police. Perhaps the motive wasn't mafia vengeance after all. Perhaps it was money. The crime scene red flags, re-examining the evidence. Detectives noticed glaring inconsistencies. There were no shell casings at the crime scene. Whoever pulled the trigger had stayed behind, methodically cleaning up that didn't fit mafia style at all. Professional hitmen fire quickly and vanish. They don't risk sticking around second. The murder weapon, a 12-gauge shotgun, was loud enough to shake the walls. Neighbors reported hearing bangs, but brushed them off as firecrackers still. Why would mob killers choose such a noisy weapon in a quiet neighborhood, when silence and precision were their hallmarks? Third, the execution itself. Mafia hits are clean and efficient. 1 or 2 shots, usually to the back of the head, but here, 16 rounds were fired. Jose hit 6 times, Kitty 10. The scene wasn't professional. It was overkill. It looked more like a cinematic bloodbath than a calculated hit, and detectives couldn't ignore one chilling coincidence. Scarface, with its iconic shootout, was Lyle Menendez's favorite film. The gunpowder slipped and came an incriminating slip when detectives asked Eric what he noticed upon entering the house after the murders. He replied, "I smelled gunpowder." The statement stopped investigators cold. How do you know it was gunpowder? One detective pressed. Eric froze, caught mid-sentence. Police already estimated the murders occurred around 10 p.m., nearly 2 hours before the brothers claimed to arrive home. Could the scent of gunpowder really linger that long in an open house? And why hadn't Eric first mentioned the strong metallic stench of blood, unmistakable and overwhelming? Why gunpowder? That single detail deepened suspicion. Their past caught up still. Suspicion isn't evidence. The case stalled till detectives began digging into the brothers' past years. Earlier, before Beverly Hills wealth, Lyle and Eric had teamed up for a pair of burglary sprees, stealing over $100,000 in jewelry and cash. When caught, it was Jose who swooped in, cleaning up the mess. He repaid every cent, added another $11,000 in restitution, and hired an elite lawyer to secure the lightest possible punishments, since Eric was still a minor. Jose pinned the entire blame on him to protect Lyle's pristine record. The gamble worked. Eric got probation and mandatory therapy. It was during this therapy that Eric met Dr. Jerome Azil, a Beverly Hills psychologist, and it was Dr. Azil who would later play a critical role in cracking the case wide open. The confession after Jose and Kitty's deaths. Eric, emotionally rattled and guilt-ridden, returned to therapy with Dr. Azil. At first, the sessions followed normal lines, but Eric grew restless, twitchy, unable to contain his anxiety. Then one day, he broke. "We did it," he blurted. Azil pressed carefully. "You mean, you and your brother killed your parents?" Eric didn't just nod. He opened the floodgates, recounting the night in painstaking detail, the shots, the chaos, even the planning. He spoke with chilling candor, as though unburdening a secret too heavy to carry. According to Eric, their father had been a domineering tyrant, a man who controlled every facet of their lives. Years of physical and emotional abuse had driven them to the breaking point. Their mother, far from protector, had numbed herself with alcohol and pills, leaving the boys to endure their father's wrath. Along Kitty's death, Eric claimed, wasn't out of hate, but despair. They believed she couldn't survive without Jose. Better she go with him than be left behind in torment. Dr. Ozil's dilemma for a psychologist. Such a confession poses a grave ethical dilemma. Doctor-patient privilege is sacred, but so is public safety. Dr. Azil didn't immediately go to the police. Instead, he saw another path: leverage. He realized he now held the ultimate bargaining chip, the Menendez brothers' darkest secret. If played right, it could catapult him into fame and Perhaps even fortune Ozil maneuvered carefully, convincing Eric to bring Lyle into therapy for a joint session if both brothers confessed. His hold on them would be airtight. What happened next would push the Menendez saga into its most shocking chapter yet. Under the guise of helping the brothers heal, Dr. Aziel secretly set a trap. He invited Lyle to join Eric in a joint therapy session, and behind their trustful faces, he pressed record. Every word was captured: Derek's halting remorse, Lyle's confirmations, their chilling justifications. Then came the betrayal. Aziel hinted that his role as their therapist came at a price: weekly payments, whether sessions were needed or not. If the money flowed, perhaps, just perhaps, his tapes could someday serve as their shield in court. Refuse him, and those same recordings could become the dagger that sealed their fate. The truth: this wasn't Ozil's first dance with manipulation. Years earlier, when Eric had been forced into therapy after the burglary conviction, Jose Menendez himself had slipped cash to Aziel in exchange for private details about his son's sessions. The doctor knew it was an ethical and legal violation, but he hadn't hesitated. Money from the Menendez family always seemed to find its way into his pocket now. With a double murder on his hands, Aziel sensed something far bigger, something explosive. But even opportunists get nervous. He knew blackmailing two parasital sons carried risks. What if they turned on him? What if his career collapsed? To protect himself, he pulled another deceitful move, positioning his mistress, Judalon Smith, just outside his office door. During the brothers' confessions, she eavesdropped, ready to serve as a third-party witness should his credibility ever come under fire with her word. He could claim he hadn't acted alone, but Judalon wasn't merely a mistress. She'd once been his patient too. Their professional relationship crossing the line into a tangled affair that soured within months. When it imploded, bitterness burned hotter than passion, and soon she detonated the secret he thought he held safely. Storming into a police station, she dropped her bombshell: Dr. Aziel raped me, and I have to tell you something else. His patients, the Menendez brothers, admitted to killing their parents. I overheard everything. They even used fake driver's licenses to buy the guns. And they threatened him if he talked. They said they'd kill him. To the room must have frozen detectives, pens hovering, glanced at each other in disbelief. Then the floodgates opened, notes scribbled furiously, a witness claiming inside knowledge of America's most sensational murder. They couldn't ignore it. Armed with Judalon's testimony, investigators secured a warrant and raided Ozil's office. Inside, they discovered the very tapes the brothers had never imagined would see daylight. With those recordings, the case finally had its smoking gun. On March 8, 1990, Beverly Hills police convened a press conference at 1 p.m. The words reverberated across the country. The Menendez brothers had been arrested. Lyle was intercepted behind the wheel of a luxury car, the symbol of his excess. 4 days later, Eric, returning from a tennis tournament in Israel, walked off a plane straight into custody, his pro-athlete dreams vanishing in a heartbeat. But the scandal deepened 3 months into their incarceration. The sheriff's department announced yet another twist. The brothers had been plotting a jailbreak. A raid on their cells uncovered a 17-page handwritten letter from Lyle to Eric, detailing escape fantasies and pleas to destroy the evidence. Eric couldn't. He clung to it like a talisman, but its discovery obliterated what little credibility they had left. The stage was now set for one of the most sensational trials in American history. A case that had begun as whispers of a mafia hit had transformed into a national obsession. To some, seen as heirs to fortune, privilege, and legacy, now painted as parricides, their lives exposed under the harshest spotlight. By the summer of 1993, crowds surged outside the courthouse. News vans lined the streets. Cameras and microphones captured every angle as the trial was broadcast live into millions of American homes. The very first time such access had been granted. This wasn't just a trial, it was a spectacle. Defending the brothers were two formidable women, Jill Lansing and Leslie Abramson. Lansing, Lyle's attorney, had once finessed his burglary charges into a slap on the wrist. A former prosecutor, She was a master of evidence and technicalities, a tactician who knew how to exploit every legal crack. Abramson, Eric's lawyer, was her fiery counterpart, a tiny figure with a volcanic courtroom presence. Famously described as 100 pounds of dynamite, she had built her reputation turning hopeless cases into victories, recasting killers as tragic figures undone by trauma. Together, they devised their strategy with the evidence overwhelming. Letters, financial motives, flat denial was futile. Instead, they shifted the battleground. This wasn't cold-blooded murder. They argued it was survival. The Menendez brothers hadn't slaughtered for greed. They had rebelled against a reign of terror. This was self-defense, born not of a single night, but of years steeped in abuse. And when the brothers took the stand, the nation gasped on live television. Their confessions poured out not about the killings, but about what they claimed had driven them there. Lyle spoke first, voice shaking as he described a father who violated him in unspeakable ways from the age of 6. "He came into my room," Liao recounted, "and told me it was our secret." His words painted Jose not as a visionary immigrant success story, but as a predator cloaked in respectability. Eric echoed his brother, his testimony a river of fear. "If I resisted, he would threaten me with a knife," he said. "If I ever told, he would kill me." Family members took the stand too, corroborating glimpses of Jose's cruelty. His sister described a childhood obsessed with dominance, where winning was prized above compassion. Cousins shared memories of psychological torment of children forced into impossible endurance tests, of trust betrayed during cruel games, of Kitty, the mother, retreating into silence and alcohol rather than shielding her sons to the watching public. It was a revelation. The Menendez home, once the envy of neighbors, recast as a gilded cage behind its gates, had lurked secrets darker than anyone could have imagined. Kitty Menendez's polished exterior had long concealed inner turbulence in court. Witnesses recalled how her moods swung like a pendulum, often snapping at Lyle with biting words, sometimes hurling objects at him in bursts of rage. By 1986, her emotional fragility worsened. That year, she uncovered Jose's 8-year-long affair, a revelation that shattered what little stability remained. The betrayal plunged her deeper into despair, fueling reckless outbursts that destabilized the entire household. The Netflix dramatization captured one moment vividly, and for once, it wasn't embellishment in a family altercation. Kitty ripped the wig from Lyle's head, exposing the secret he had guarded for years. At just 14, Lyle had begun losing his hair, a humiliating condition he concealed with costly custom wigs. Even Eric, his closest confidant, hadn't known to have that shame ripped away by his mother in front of family members was a wound far deeper than physical pain. It was humiliation etched into memory. Lyle himself confirmed the incident on the stand, and just 5 days before the murders, Kitty repeated the cruelty during another eruption, seizing and yanking away his wig as Eric looked on, horrified for Lyle. It was the final straw in a life already suffocated by control, secrecy, and fear. The defense argued the brothers weren't motivated by greed, but by desperation. They lived under their father's abuse and their mother's volatility, walking a tightrope of dread every single day. If wealth were the true motive, they could have simply waited. They were the sole heirs. Stein would have delivered fortune without risk. Instead, they insisted the killings were an eruption of terror, born of emotional disturbance, not cold calculation, but to sway a jury. The defense needed more than sympathy. They had to prove the brothers genuinely believed their lives were in immediate danger, that Jose's wrath wasn't just harsh parenting, but a death sentence waiting to fall. So they rewound to the days before the murders. Eric had received an acceptance letter from Stanford, a chance to finally escape, but his father crushed that hope instantly. "No Stanford," Jose barked. "If you go to college, it's local, and you'll live at home. No dorms, no freedom." His tone left no room for negotiation. Eric, devastated, confided in Lyle, and for the first time, Lyle confronted their father in the study. Voices rose in anger. Echoing through the mansion, Kitty rushed in, blurting out a truth that detonated like a bomb. She had long known what Eric endured in that moment. Lyle realized the betrayal ran deeper than he imagined. Their mother had known all along, and had done nothing to him. It meant there was no escape, no ally, no future. Lyle told Eric, "We can't just sit here waiting to die if we don't act. One day they'll kill us fueled by fear." The brothers made their choice. They borrowed friends' driver's licenses and bought a 12-gauge shotgun from a sporting goods store to boys. Terrified and cornered, convinced they were striking preemptively to save themselves on the night of August 20th. The atmosphere in the Menendez mansion was electric. With tension, Lyle told Kitty they were leaving for good. A shouting match erupted. Jose appeared at the stairwell, his expression a mask of fury. He ordered Eric upstairs, his voice booming with cold authority. Eric hesitated, but obeyed. The heavy door slammed behind Jose. As he stalked into the living room, Lyle stood frozen, heart hammering, staring at the closed door. Certain violence was about to erupt. He rushed upstairs to Eric. "It's now," he said. The defense framed it as extreme emotional disturbance, a psychological break, driven by years of abuse, forcing a rash, tragic act of self-preservation. Bet the prosecution saw it differently. To them, it wasn't trauma, it was theater, fabricated stories, convenient narratives designed to soften the horror of what was really premeditated patricide and matricide. Where was the independent proof? There were no outside witnesses, no medical records confirming the abuse, just the brothers' words, spoken at the very moment they faced life in prison. And then there were the details that, in the prosecution's eyes, destroyed the defense's claims of panic and disorder. The stolen IDs, the purchase of the shotgun, the meticulous cleanup of shell casings, the carefully rehearsed alibi of going to the movies. These weren't the acts of two boys in a blind frenzy. They were the steps of planners, calculating, determined to kill and get away with it. Prosecutors unveiled a particularly damning piece of evidence, a screenplay Eric had co-written with his friend Craig, titled Friends. Its protagonist, an 18-year-old who murders his parents to inherit money for a grand ambition. Attached to the draft was Eric's handwritten note describing the characters' insatiable greed for inheritance after the murders. Craig had reread the script and was shaken to his core. The opening scene mirrored the actual crime to prosecutors. This wasn't coincidence, it was foreshadowing, a glimpse into Eric's darkest fantasies, made reality. And then came the most devastating blow to the defense's argument. Testimony that Jose had planned to cut his sons out of the will days before his death. The executor of his estate recalled Jose's words. He had told friends and colleagues he no longer intended to leave his fortune to Lyle and Eric. They were irresponsible, wasteful, undeserving. "I've told them, they get nothing," Jose had said, coldly. Suddenly, motive crystallized. If the brothers waited, they wouldn't inherit millions. They'd inherit nothing. For the prosecution, it was the final nail to them. This wasn't self-defense, it was greed, wrapped in a fabricated cloak of victimhood. Jose's decision wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. His sons' repeated thefts and failures had drained his patience. Lyle's suspension from Princeton, caught cheating in his very first semester, deepened his father's disappointment to Jose. His sons were not only academic failures, but moral failures, unworthy heirs to the empire he had built. Prosecutors argued that the brothers understood what was coming. Jose was rewriting his will, and they knew it. If it went through, they'd be cut off completely. That knowledge, they said, forced their hand. And in that light, Kitty's death wasn't just collateral, it was essential. With both parents gone, there'd be no one left to rewrite, revoke, or contest the fortune. The wig incident may have been the final straw for Lyle, but the prosecution insisted the real motive was cold calculation. Testimony revealed that, just days after Jose's death, the brothers hired a computer expert to erase will-related files from his personal computer, later claiming it was the work of a mysterious hacker. And Then came the abuse claims. The prosecution tore into them. If the brothers truly suffered years of molestation and torment, why hadn't they spoken sooner? Why had no psychiatrist, no family friend, no teacher ever heard a whisper of it before their arrest? Even Judeline Smith, the mistress, who secretly recorded their confessions with Dr. Azel, testified she never heard them mention abuse until it became part of their legal defense to the state. It looked too convenient. The Menendez brothers weren't victims, they were liars, and skilled ones at that, from the moment they dialed 911. Prosecutors said they put on an Oscar-worthy performance. Their panic, their horror, their grief, all rehearsed, all fake. And in early 1990s America, the idea of male children as long-term sexual abuse victims was a hard sell. Jose Menendez was the image of polished success, a corporate powerhouse, immaculately dressed, the American dream in flesh. His sons were wealthy, handsome, privileged. They didn't fit the mold of victims. In the courtroom, that perception split the jury along gender lines. Most of the men on the panel leaned toward first-degree murder, unable to imagine sons suffering in silence for years. Most of the women leaned the other way, more open to believing the abuse narrative, urging a lesser charge. After more than a month of bitter deliberations, the jury was deadlocked. A mistrial was declared, but when the brothers faced retrial, the climate had shifted. The O.J. Simpson verdict had rocked America, souring public trust in the courts and putting enormous pressure on judges and prosecutors alike. Determined to avoid another spectacle, the new judge banned live TV coverage, barred many of the defense's psychologists and family witnesses, and ruled that claims of abuse were irrelevant to the legal question of murder. It was a devastating blow. With victimhood stripped from the equation, the jury's options narrowed, and within just 1 week of deliberations, they returned their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. The brothers were sentenced to life in prison without parole, separated into different prisons. They began serving what seemed like a destiny sealed in stone. Decades passed. Appeal after appeal was denied, yet hope never completely did in. 2018, after 21 years apart, their request to be housed together was finally granted. The brothers were reunited, reflecting not just a personal victory, but a broader cultural shift. By then, conversations around male abuse victims had entered mainstream awareness. Oprah Winfrey had once devoted an entire episode to men sharing their childhood traumas. The #MeToo movement was in full force. Society was beginning to look differently at cases like theirs then. In the 2020s, a new generation picked up their story. TikTok lit up with the Menendez saga, drawing millions of young viewers into a case most of them hadn't even been alive to witness. On social media, sympathy surged. Many argued that lifelong imprisonment for two boys trapped in a cycle of fear and abuse was too harsh, even unjust. Free. The Menendez brothers began trending worldwide, and then, in 2023, came the bombshell. Roy Russo, a former member of the 1980s boy band, came forward publicly. He accused Jose Menendez, then a powerful RCA executive, of sexually abusing him decades earlier. Suddenly, the brothers' claims no longer looked like self-serving inventions. For the first time, an outside voice, some connected to the family, with no stake in the trial, corroborated their story. The shockwaves didn't stop there. A long-forgotten letter surfaced, written by Eric Menendez to his cousin's father just 8 months before the murders. It detailed, in anguished words, the sexual abuse he was enduring. The details aligned with testimony given years later by the brothers' cousin, but that uncle never revealed the letter during the original trials, and he died in 2003, taking the reasons for his silence with him, armed with shocking new revelations. The Menendez brothers filed a writ of habeas corpus, hoping to overturn their life sentences. September 2024. A Swiss documentary reignited global fascination with their case, but the series cast Lyle and Eric less as broken sons and more as ruthless heirs, willing to kill for wealth. The brothers hit back hard, denouncing it as a patchwork of lies, and defamation. Then came a surprising voice of support, Kim Kardashian, in October. She publicly argued that the Menendez brothers deserved a second chance. The irony was impossible to miss her father. Robert Kardashian had been one of O.J. Simpson's closest friends and part of his defense team, a trial whose shadow had directly influenced the Menendez case. Public outrage after Simpson's acquittal had piled immense pressure on prosecutors to secure convictions against the Rosen, a strange twist of fate. Even Simpson himself once shared a jail corridor with Eric Menendez locked in neighboring cells. The two men swapped stories. Their families, it turned out, had crossed paths long before in the 1980s, when Jose Menendez, as head of Hertz, signed Simpson as the company's face on October 24th. Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon proposed a retrial and even floated the possibility of release, citing the brothers, decades behind bars and their families longing for a reunion, but critics called it political theater. Within weeks, Gascon lost his re-election bid. The stance of the new district attorney remains unclear. What is clear is this: on January 30th, 2025, the Los Angeles Superior Court will hold a resentencing hearing, giving the incoming DA the chance to weigh in more than 30 years later. The Menendez case is no longer just a legal battle. It has become a mirror, reflecting society's evolving view of abuse, privilege, trauma, and justice. As fresh evidence surfaces and cultural awareness deepens, the debate has shifted from the guilt of two brothers to the fairness of the system itself. Story 3. We turn now from Beverly Hills mansions to the glittering heart of London. A legendary diamond, a daring heist, and a gang bold enough to try the impossible have always held a special place in human obsession. Rare, costly, and timeless. In the late 1990s, one discovery sent shockwaves through the global market: a 777-carat rough diamond. After months of work, master cutters shaped it into a flawless 20,304-carat pear-shaped gem, the Millennium Star-graded D-color, the purest of the pure. It was the second largest diamond of its kind on Earth, valued at an estimated $350 million. It was unveiled at the dawn of the new millennium, inside London's Millennium Dome, a dazzling centerpiece under unblinking lights. But among the awestruck crowds were eyes that didn't just admire, they coveted. And in the shadows, a plot was forming. On August 25th, one of the crew's most trusted members rolled up to the gang's hideout in a van. In the back sat a familiar companion, the same speedboat they had relied on for earlier getaways. Around this time, detectives chasing their trail stumbled upon something unusual. Wenham, another key player, had purchased a ticket to the Millennium Dome in London. The dome, built to celebrate the turn of the century, was no ordinary attraction perched on the Greenwich Peninsula. It spanned a space larger than 170 football fields inside. Visitors wandered through futuristic exhibits, bustling shops, and daily performances designed to impress the masses. But to police, it wasn't the entertainment value that stood out. It was the dome's location, hemmed in by the Thames on three sides. The site was practically tailor-made for criminals who specialized in fast boat escapes. That raised the alarm. What prize could possibly lure the gang here? It didn't take long for the answer to surface. Undercover officers shadowed Wenham during his visit. He breezed through the ticket checkpoint, then slipped into the dome's central exhibition space, the glittering heart of the complex. There, secured behind thick glass, rested the Millennium Star, a flawless 350 million pound diamond, one of the largest in the world. Wenham couldn't take his eyes off it. He circled the display repeatedly, photographing it from every angle. One officer managed to trail him within a few feet, quietly noting his fixation. That was all. Chief Inspector Schaefer needed to confirm what he already suspected. The gang wasn't interested in small hauls anymore. They were plotting to steal the crown jewel of the dome itself. If they succeeded, it would be the largest gem heist in British history. Shefford wasted no time. He launched a sting operation. codenamed Operation Magician. The diamond's owners were contacted immediately for safety. Police advised swapping the real Millennium Star with a replica. The move was urgent. Intelligence suggested the robbers might strike during transport on September 1st. The gem was scheduled for a brief overseas exhibition in Tokyo. Its departure was heavily publicized, and the gang likely knew it. A strike on that day seemed almost inevitable, so, as dawn broke on September 1st, nearly 300 officers fanned out across the Millennium Dome, and the surrounding riverbanks. Armed units hid inside. More patrolled the Thames in boats, and the replica diamond glittered safely in its case. Sat the farm. Informants reported the crew gearing up, their vehicles heading toward London. Every officer tensed, ready for action. Hours passed, but the robbers never arrived. Shefford was forced to stand down. The massive sting cost hundreds of thousands of pounds, but produced nothing later. Intelligence revealed why the plan fizzled. The gang had suffered a setback. The speedboat's propeller had failed. Without a reliable escape, they refused to take the risk to the police. The miss was infuriating, but patience was key. Sometimes you had to let small fish swim free to catch the shark, and the shark was still circling weeks later. Millman returned to the farm with a replacement boat, freshly purchased for £2,000 on the invoice. The buyer's name, Red T. Diamond. His first name was Terry. The surname was a mocking taunt to investigators. It was a clear signal. The gang had not abandoned the Millennium Star by now. A fifth accomplice had joined their ranks, 32-year-old Karaki. Unlike the hardened veterans he fell in with, Karaki had no prior record. Once a real estate businessman, his fortunes had collapsed. Leaving him desperate, the gang brought him in to service the boat's engine, ensuring there would be no repeat of their earlier break. Rest of the crew focused on another tool, one far less subtle. They had stolen a bulldozer and modified it extensively. It became clear this machine would play a central role in their next attempt. The Millennium Star's Tokyo exhibition came to a close. The diamond returned to London and resumed its display inside the dome. By this stage, police had stationed armed guards around the exhibit day and night. Still, the gang continued visiting, watching, timing their moves. The strike came fast and violent. The modified bulldozer roared to life, its engine snarling as it smashed through concrete barriers and crashed into the dome's plaza. A 15-foot gate crumpled like paper under its weight. Perched on the machine were 4 masked men. As it screeched to a halt, one jumped down, tossing smoke bombs and pepper spray canisters into the air. Acrid fumes filled the space, blinding the security cameras and choking visibility. To gang members sprinted straight for the Millennium Star's display, armed with a sledgehammer and a nail gun. They launched a furious assault. The hammer rang against the bulletproof glass, sending cracks spiderwebbing across the surface, while the nail gun blasted into the fractures, widening the damage blow after blow. They edged closer to the diamond. What they didn't know was that the stone glittering inside the case was nothing but a replica. Just as their mission seemed within reach, a bus filled with schoolchildren pulled up outside for a dome tour. The potential tragedy forced police to act immediately. Officers rushed to secure the kids, shepherding them to safety before turning back to the chaos. Once the children were clear, Chief Inspector Shefford gave the signal from every corner. Armed officers surged forward. A swarm of police surrounded the bulldozer, yanking the men on top to the ground inside the exhibit. Officers hidden behind false walls stormed out, overwhelming the 2 robbers at the case. A single concussive flashbang dropped them flat, and police piled on before they could recover. Across the Thames, the gang's boat driver sat waiting for his crew, but his escape route had already been cut off. A police speedboat roared out of nowhere, ramming alongside and taking him down before he could react. A quick search of his craft revealed gallons of gasoline fuel meant to torch the evidence. After the getaway, the van driver stationed across the river was seized within minutes, and even the ringleader coordinating from the farm was arrested in a synchronized raid. It was total victory. Not a single officer, staff member, or Civilio was harmed. Operation Magician had unfolded exactly as planned. Their arrests didn't stop there. Alongside the 5 known robbers, police captured 2 others, Adams, who had joined the gang only a day earlier, and Meredith, a seasoned sailor promised £10,000 to pilot the boat. Every thread of the conspiracy had been pulled tight. 1 year later, in November 2001, the case finally reached the Central Criminal Court of England. Wenham and 6 accomplices stood trial for armed robbery. Through weeks of testimony, 2 names rose to the top as masterminds: Cochran and Battison. Battison, under questioning, implicated his own brother-in-law, dome security guard. According to him, the guard had tipped him off, claiming a wealthy buyer stood ready to pay a fortune for the diamond. The plan was simple. Battison would steal it. The guard would provide intel, and the profits would be split after the sale. But, on the stand, the brother-in-law flatly denied everything. No evidence tied him to the heist, and the court rejected Battison's claim as an act of desperation. Meredith, the boatman, pleaded ignorance. He insisted he had no idea. The job involved Britain's most famous diamond. He claimed Cochran approached him the night before, offering debt relief in cash to take the wheel when he refused. He said Cochran threatened his family, leaving him no choice but to comply. 3 months later, the jury delivered its verdict. Millman, one of the core members, had already died of cancer. Cochran and Battison were convicted of robbery and sentenced to 18 years each. Sarah and Adams, also guilty of robbery, received 15 years apiece. Meredith and Wenham were convicted of conspiracy to rob, drawing sentences of 5 and 4 years. But Wenham's legal woes didn't end there. In court, he admitted involvement in another failed heist, adding 9 more years to his term. Appeals followed. Cochran claimed police brutality, alleging he was beaten, handcuffed to the floor, and left gasping for air. After review, the court reduced sentences slightly. Cochran and Battison to 15 years. Sarah to 12. Police still suspected an 8th man, James Hurley, before the robbery. He had been spotted on the Thames, photographing the dome from the water after the heist. He fled to Spain, extradited back to Britain. Hurley was interrogated, but never charged with no solid evidence. He walked free. Years passed. Some gang members tried to rebuild their lives. Others couldn't resist slipping back into crime. In 2014, soon after parole, Battison returned to his old ways. This time, his weapon was an excavator. Alongside new accomplices, he rammed into a cash depot wall, attempting to dig his way to the vault. Guards raised the alarm, and the job collapsed. Battison was caught red-handed and handed 13 years for attempted robbery. The legend of the dome heist, however, never faded. In 2015, the Museum of London placed on display several artifacts from the case tools used in the attack, and even the boat invoice signed under the mocking name T-Diamond. Curators explained that these relics weren't just souvenirs of a crime, but windows into society, showing how criminals adapt and how law enforcement must evolve to stay ahead. The so-called heist of the century had ended, not in riches, but in ruin. Every robber was unmasked, every plan undone. What was meant to be their crowning triumph became instead a showcase for modern policing. And, with that case closed, we moved to a very different kind of high-stakes gamble, one not on the streets, but in the markets. Because, when you hear the phrase stock market genius, certain names instantly come to mind: Warren Buffett, George Soros, maybe even Koguchi Ginzo. But in Japan, a new legend was Razinga, trader whose audacious moves and spectacular wins etched him into financial folklore. His name was Takashi Kotagawa. He was just another university student by He had turned a modest 16 million yen, around $13,000 to nearly 200 million yen, playing stocks by 30. His fortune ballooned to a staggering 218 billion yen, about $175 million. Even Masayoshi Son, the billionaire head of SoftBank, once courted him over dinner, asking him to manage his fortune. Kotagawa declined. So, how did he do it? What was the secret? behind his meteoric rise. You're watching True Crime in the World, where we uncover the most puzzling cases and the most gripping stories. And today, we step into the cutthroat world of Tokyo finance. December 8th, 2005, the Tokyo Stock Exchange investors watched the markets as usual until history cracked open that morning. Jacom, a staffing giant, made its market debut with 1,400 shares at precisely 9:27 a.m. A trader at Mizuho Securities keyed in an order: sell one share of JCOM for 610,000 yen, about $4,000, but in a single devastating keystroke. He made a fatal error. Instead of one share at 610,000 yen, he entered 610,000 shares at 1 yen each. A red warning flashed on the system, but accustomed to daily glitches, the trader dismissed it, clicked confirm, and unleashed chaos. A monster sell order appeared on the Tokyo boards, detonating through the market like a thunderclap. December 8th, 2005, Tokyo. The trading floor at Mizuho Securities buzzed like any other morning. Rows of glowing monitors, fingers hammering keyboards, millions moving with each keystroke, but in just 85 seconds. One slip of the fingers would trigger one of the biggest blunders in Japan's financial history. Started with a single order. A trader at Mizuho meant to sell one share of JCOM CO for 610,000 yen, about $5,000 at the time. Instead, he typed the reverse: 610,000 shares for just 1 yen each, the so-called fat finger error. The mistake was catastrophic. JCOM had only issued 14,500 shares in total, yet, in the blink of an eye, an order for 610,000 phantom shares hit the market more than 6 times the company's entire stock supply. In the world of high finance, typos aren't harmless. They can whip prices and volumes into chaos, fueling panic and rumors in seconds. This wasn't just Mizuho's problem anymore. The shock rippled through the entire Tokyo Stock Exchange. Brokerage stocks tanked. Rumors swirled. A major securities firm was imploding by the end of that trading session. The Nikkei 225 index, Japan's market heartbeat, had nosedived. 301 points, billions, evaporated in hours. The trader realized his mistake in just 85 seconds. Desperate, he fired off 3 cancellation requests. But the Tokyo Stock Exchange's systems buckled under the error. Each request bounced back. The order stuck. A system glitch had frozen one of the costliest mistakes in financial history at the exchange. Staffers shrugged. We can't just erase a completed trade, they said. Canceling would require reports, approvals, bureaucratic signatures. By then, Mizuho would be bleeding out. So the firm tried to fight fire with fire. They began buying back JCOM shares to stem the disaster. Prices shot upward first, a desperate scramble, then a rocket. By 9:43 a.m., JCOM shares spiked to 772,000 yen, about $6,200 each. But the damage was done. Tens of thousands of shares had already been scooped up by traders. Shares that didn't even exist. Market rules are unforgiving. If you sell it, you deliver it. But how do you deliver phantom stock? The Japan Securities Clearing Corporation made the call. Settlement would be in cash, not shares. They pegged the buyback price at 912,000 yen per share, roughly $7,700 for Mizuho. It was a financial bloodbath. Losses piled into the hundreds of billions of yen. A single keystroke nearly wiped them off the map. But in the brutal arena of stock trading, one firm's ruin is another's jackpot. Savvy traders smelled the mistake instantly. They pounced on JCOM shares at fire sale prices, flipping them for astronomical profits within minutes. December 14th, 2005. Public outrage boiled over Japan's regulators, and the press demanded answers. Global heavyweights like UBS, Morgan Stanley Japan, Lehman Brothers Japan, and Nikko Cordials stepped in, volunteering to return some of their glitch profits. But not everyone played ball. Smaller firms refused to surrender their windfalls, arguing that their shareholders could sue if they gave away legal profits. By February 2006, after tense negotiations, Japan's Securities Association unveiled a compromise. A special fund traders who had profited from the glitch would contribute to stabilize the market, without directly bailing out Mizuho. Bleeding slowed, but Mizuho still lost staggering sums for ordinary retail traders. However, the fat finger glitch was a once-in-a-lifetime lottery. The government couldn't claw back their profits for them. It was all legal, and one man's windfall would enter Japanese financial legend and Japan's trading boards. A mysterious figure began to emerge. He went by the alias BNF, a playful nod to his idol, American trading titan Victor Niederhofer. In Japanese slang, the V became a B, and a legend was born at first. BNF seemed like just another voice in the forums, posting daily trade logs, geeking out over numbers, swapping banter with fellow traders. But soon, Jaws began to drop. His profits in a single day dwarfed the annual salaries of ordinary office workers. Envy followed. So did ridicule. Trolls mocked his rise, slinging insults at the faceless trader. And then, in 2004, he vanished. The forum went quiet. BNF had gone underground until December 8, 2005, when Mizuho's fat finger fiasco shook the markets. The man behind the BNF alias was revealed. He wasn't just some lucky amateur, he was Takashi. And now, he was richer than most men could ever dream. Kotagawa's story began humbly in 2000. He scraped together about $13,000, minus 16 million yen from part-time jobs. By 2001, he had turned that into $490,000. By 2002, he broke the million mark, sitting on $700,000 by 2004. His portfolio had exploded to $92 million, and then came the fat finger windfall. Within 3 years, Kotagawa transformed his modest stake into an almost unimaginable fortune. $175 million over 21 billion yen. What made it more astonishing was the backdrop. The Nikkei 225, Japan's market pulse, wasn't soaring, it was sagging, sliding from 19,000 points in 2000 to 17,000 by 2007. Kotagawa hadn't ridden a bull market wave. He had carved his empire through skill, instinct, and ruthless precision. For a lone retail trader, it was an achievement unmatched in Japanese financial history. By 2008, the legend of BNF was so large that TV crews followed him into his daily routine. What they found stunned viewers. His mornings began at 7:30 a.m. By 9, he was locked into 5 or 6 screens, eyes fixed, fingers flying. He traded in silence, sometimes moving tens or even hundreds of billions of yen in a single day. His typical earnings, around $80,000 a day. Yet his lifestyle was shockingly plain. Lunch was a cup of instant noodles. Big meals make me sleepy. He shrugged. No cigarettes, no booze, no clubs or parties. His wardrobe, discount bin supermarket clothes. His hobbies, none unless you count staring at the ticker. He called himself a stock otaku, a nerd whose only obsession was the market weekends. He barely left the house. He read books, played video games, maybe took a quiet walk, his wildest indulgence. 2 Nintendo consoles, 1 upstairs, 1 downstairs. I don't really like spending money, he admitted in one interview, but it keeps piling up. I don't even understand why when he did spend, it was for others. After his fortune ballooned, he bought his parents a lavish 3-story villa, then moved in with them for his father's birthday. He bought a new car for himself. He still rode the subway eventually. Kotagawa branched into real estate in 2008. He dropped $72 million, over 9 billion yen, in a commercial building in Akihabara in 2011. He spent $136 million on a cultural hub in the same district by 2013. He added another property in Shibuya real estate. His answer was blunt. I had too much cash. If I tried to trade it all in stocks, I could crash the market myself. After a handful of TV appearances, Kotagawa vanished again, slipping back into the shadows, living as a recluse, shunning the spotlight. The fallout from the Fatfinger disaster dragged on from Mizuho. The nightmare didn't end in 2005. It sparked a decade-long legal war. The trader at the center of it all had realized his mistake instantly, firing off cancellation requests that the system rejected again and again. He even called the exchange directly, begging them to stop the order, but the Tokyo Stock Exchange refused, claiming the trade had already executed. The public was furious if a single glitch could bring down a major bank. How stable was the system? Was the exchange hiding behind bureaucracy to dodge blame? On December 9, 2005, the Tokyo Stock Exchange called an emergency press conference. Its president Takuo Tsurushima and top directors bowed deeply in apology at Chief Tomio Amano resigned on the spot. The Mizuho trader, however, received little more than a slap on the wrist. His identity was never revealed. His punishment, minimal word spread that his mistake had cost the firm its entire year-end bonuses, making him an office pariah. Whether he resigned quietly or kept working, no one knows for sure. By September 2006, Mizuho escalated, suing both the Tokyo Stock Exchange and Fujitsu, the company that had built its trading system. Investigators uncovered the root of the glitch: a coding error from 2000. A Fujitsu engineer had skipped crucial regression tests. The flaw had lingered in the system for years, waiting for disaster. The system that doomed Mizuho was supposed to be bulletproof, but when investigators peeled it back, the truth was brutal. Fujitsu had built the exchange's core trading engine. Somewhere along the line, a programmer skipped a critical regression test. Tokyo Stock Exchange, TSE, signed off anyway, barely glancing at the code before stamping approval. The result: a hidden time bomb, ticking away in the system until it detonated on December 8, 2005. When the dust settled, TSE tried shifting blame. Fujitsu dropped the ball. They argued we demanded a cancel function they failed to deliver. If Mizuho Securities drowned, that's their mess. The court wasn't buying it. Judges fired back with razor sarcasm. By that logic, Microsoft would owe billions for every Windows crash. Even Bill Gates wouldn't recognize the size of his debt. The Tokyo District Court made it clear C owned the system. Fujitsu was just the contractor, unless Fujitsu had catastrophically botched the job. The exchange was on the hook. The courtroom became a war zone of coders and experts. Mizuho's side screamed. This bug was so obvious, even a rookie could spot it. Fujitsu clapped back. If it's so simple, then prove it. Fix it live, right here in the end. The court ruled the glitch wasn't catastrophic enough to pin liability on Fujitsu. They walked free, but the exchange wasn't so lucky. The judges tore into C for ignoring Mizuho's desperate pleas to cancel the rogue order. A failure, the court called, glaring and unforgivable. The bill was split. TSE was forced to shoulder 70% of the damage, roughly $860 million, or 107 billion yen. Mizuho was left choking on the remaining losses. Both sides fumed, filing appeals, but on September 3, 2015, the Tokyo High Court slammed the door shut. The original verdict stood after a decade of trench warfare. The legal saga was finally over, and, through it all, one man's legend only grew larger. Takashi Kotagawa B. NFHI's meteoric rise left a burning question. How did he do it? Most day traders go broke. He multiplied his fortune tens of thousands of times in a handful of years, even after retreating from public life. Whispers about him still ripple through Japan's financial underworld. Some say he cashed out, retired, and vanished. Others insist he lost it all, burned by bad bets. And then there are the wild rumors that at one point his wealth touched $16 billion. And today, he lives quietly, married with children. The truth is simpler and wasn't dazzled by the money. He wasn't in it for luxury or fame. He chased something else entirely. The thrill of the game. Rare interview clips reveal a man with a monk-like discipline, courteous, soft-spoken, avoiding Japan's stiff formalities. He carried the aura of a craftsman, a man obsessed with his work. He reminded many of baseball legend Ichiro Suzuki, who once said his greatness came not from talent but from endless, grinding repetition. Kotagawa admitted he had read just a single investing book in his life. Everything else he learned by living in the trenches of the market hour after hour, day after day, until instincts fused with muscle memory fundamentals like PE or PB ratios. He waved them off. "I don't hold stocks long enough for that to matter," he said. "Sometimes I'm in and out in seconds." Instead, he locked on to macro signals market indexes, futures, central bank policies. His main weapon was a simple 25-day divergence indicator, used to hunt short-term price swings with surgical precision. His philosophy was blunt. "I have no idea where Japan's market is headed long-term, and honestly, I don't care." That calm detachment defined him in 2008, during a televised interview. Host Hiroshi Kume watched Kotagawa's screens flicker with trades worth tens of millions. "If that were me," Kume said, "I'd crumble under the pressure." Kotagawa didn't blink. When asked about daily trades swinging between $60 million and $640 million, his expression stayed flat. No excitement, no panic, just stillness. Even billionaire Masayoshi Son, founder of SoftBank, once invited him to dinner, begging Kotagawa to manage his fortune. Kotagawa politely declined. "Not my game," he said. "I don't handle other people's money." It was the perfect response from a man who lived and thrived by his own rules. Takashi Kotagawa, known as B, once summed up his trading philosophy in a single line: "The key isn't in making gains, it's knowing when to exit." For him, everything came down to timing. If the market moved harder against him than expected, he cut losses instantly. No waiting, no hope for a bounce. Online finance forums still buzz with fans dissecting his short-term magic, but his true weapon wasn't a secret indicator. It was discipline in unshakable.com, a steely focus, and a rock-solid psyche, qualities most traders lack, and the very reason so many crash and burn in the high-stakes world of day trading. But now, let's turn to a very different kind of story, one not about fortunes made, but lives destroyed. Story 5. The Brockton House Fire. On April 17, 2003, tragedy struck in Brockton, Plymouth County, Massachusetts. A devastating house fire ignited before dawn, setting off a chain of events that would haunt an Asian American family for nearly 2 decades. Years later, 25-year-old Frances Choi was sentenced to life without parole. Convicted of deliberately starting the blaze that killed her parents, she would spend 9 years in prison. All the while insisting on her innocence, her appeals dragged on. But eventually a pivotal decision reversed everything. The court declared her not guilty. She was freed. Yet freedom came at a price by then. Frances was in her 30s. 17 years of her youth, the very prime of her life, were lost behind bars. So, what really happened on that fateful night? You're watching True Crime in the World, where we uncover the most puzzling cases and gripping stories. Before we begin unraveling today's mystery, please like and subscribe to support the channel. The Choi family lived a quiet life in Brockton. Jimmy Choi, 64, a Hong Kong immigrant, his wife Anne, 53, their daughter Frances, 17, and their grandson Kenneth, 16. The close age gap between Frances and Kenneth came from tragedy years before. Jimmy had lost his first son in Hong Kong. That son left behind Kenneth, whom Jimmy brought to the US, determined to give his grandson a new start. But on April 17, 2003, tragedy struck again at 4:50 a.m. Frances was jolted awake by her mother's piercing screams. Flames surged through her doorway, smoke choking the air. Terrified, she grabbed the phone and dialed 911. With no time to spare, she forced open a window. Screaming for help, firefighters rushed to the scene within minutes. Battling the inferno, they managed to rescue both teenagers, Frances and Kenneth, from the second floor. But Jimmy and Anne remained trapped in the master bedroom. When firefighters reached them, it was too late. Anne had succumbed to smoke inhalation, while Jimmy was rushed to a hospital in critical condition. Hours later, he too was gone from the very beginning. Investigators sensed something was off. Firefighters reported a strong stench of gasoline. As soon as they entered the house, 4 containers were found inside, 2 milk cans and 2 soda bottles each, reeking of gas. The blaze, they concluded, had started from within. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no smashed windows aside from what firefighters damaged during the rescue. The house was untouched. The destruction told a chilling story. The master bedroom, where Jimmy and Ann were found, was the most devastated. Francis's room bore heavy fire damage as well. Kenneth's room, minimal damage by comparison. Detectives quickly narrowed the possibilities. This wasn't an accident. It looked like arson, and if it started inside the house, the culprit could very well be a family member at the hospital. Both Francis and Kenneth were questioned. Both denied knowing anything about what caused the fire, but suspicion was already forming later that day. Police asked Francis to inspect the charred house at first. She refused hours later. She changed her mind only to discover the house had already been sealed off. All belongings were removed. If she wanted to see anything, she'd need to go through. The police investigators had also seized the teens' clothes from the night of the fire. Tests revealed their first damning clue. Traces of gasoline on the fleece pants Francis warned. Then came the second bombshell under Kenneth's bed. Investigators discovered 2 handwritten notes. Both detailed plans for arson to detectives. The case suddenly looked clear. They believed they had their culprit. Investigators uncovered something chilling beneath Kenneth's bed. A meticulous blueprint for arson. The first note laid out 12 precise steps. How to hide the gasoline, where to spread it for maximum destruction. Even instructions to torch the master bedroom. First step 11 reminded the arsonist to keep a key handy and wait for firefighters to arrive if the fire grew out of control. The plan suggested leaping out of a window, and the 12th step, marked with an asterisk, it was a single instruction. Destroy this note immediately after the job is done. Beside it, detectives found a second, even longer plan. 20 steps, this time detailing how to use natural gas to ignite Jimmy and Ann's bedroom. Handwriting experts later confirmed both notes were written by Kenneth. That wasn't all. Near his door lay a rolled-up towel, edges singed, as if it had been used to block smoke from seeping into his room. All signs seemed to point toward Kenneth as the possible mastermind, but suspicion soon shifted again. One firefighter testified that when he rescued Francis from the blaze, she was unusually calm, almost detached. When told about the destruction of her home, she allegedly asked, "What about my stuff?" A remark investigators interpreted as callous, more concerned about possessions than the deaths of her parents. By that evening, both cousins were brought in for questioning. Francis stuck to her story. She knew nothing about gasoline when confronted with traces found on her fleece pants. She suggested maybe she had picked it up from the basement or perhaps at a friend's house. Investigators weren't convinced. In a separate room, Kenneth cracked under pressure at first. He denied everything, but when shown the arson plans written in his own handwriting, his story shifted. He claimed a stranger, a black man, had forced him to copy the notes, comparing it to one of those chain letters people passed around. "Write this 10 times, or bad luck will follow." Police dismissed the story as nonsense. Pressed harder, Kenneth changed his account again. This time, he accused Francis. He claimed that on the night of the fire, he saw her coming up from the basement, holding a gasoline-filled bottle. She demanded his help in spreading fuel around the house. When he refused, he said, she grew enraged, pouring gasoline on the living room sofa, the staircase, and the doorway to Jimmy and Ann's bedroom. Minutes later, the house was engulfed in flames. Kenneth added that Francis had once told him if her parents died, she'd inherit a life insurance payout, and had promised him $10,000 if he helped. He also claimed she resented her parents for forbidding her to see her boyfriend and burdening her with chores, with Kenneth pointing the finger. Investigators zeroed in on Francis to break the case wide open. Detectives arranged a face-to-face confrontation between the cousins. The room was tense. Charged with hostility, Frances continued to deny everything, but after more than 3 hours of questioning, nearing 11 p.m., she suddenly snapped. "I was involved," she blurted out seconds later. She took it back, insisting she had only spoken out of anger, that she didn't mean it. Police didn't care that brief admission was all they needed. Frances was arrested for arson and double murder the next day. Prosecutors Karen O'Sullivan and John Bradley announced formal charges, 2 counts of first-degree murder, and 1 count of arson against both Frances and Kenneth on January 24, 2008. Nearly 5 years after the fire, Frances went to trial for 7 days. The jury wrestled with the evidence but could not reach a unanimous verdict. The case ended in a mistrial, and Frances remained behind bars awaiting retrial. Kenneth's outcome was very different, with strong legal representation. He was acquitted. His lawyer argued Kenneth had no direct role in the fire, no gasoline on his clothes, and that he had cooperated fully with investigators. The jury sided with him. Kenneth walked free. Frances was left to face the weight of the accusations. Along Kenneth's credibility, once the linchpin of the state's case, was unraveling piece by piece behind bars. Frances had long maintained her innocence, but it wasn't until these suppressed details began surfacing that the cracks in the prosecution's narrative could no longer be ignored. The revelation that Kenneth had twice attempted to torch what was left of the Choi family home while Frances awaited trial was staggering. It wasn't just suspicious, it was damning. If the prosecution had shared this fact with the defense, it could have radically shifted the outcome of her trials. Instead, the evidence was buried, hidden away like an inconvenient truth. Equally disturbing was the testimony of Kenneth's former friend, who recalled his chilling confession. He was the one who had bought the gasoline, doused the Choi home, and sparked the inferno. His motive, a bitter cocktail of anger and resentment toward his grandparents. He admitted to staining his own clothes with fuel, yet somehow, police never tested them. Instead, they focused on Frances, twisting every shred of evidence to fit their theory. The deeper John J. Barter and the Innocence Project dug, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't just a flawed investigation, it was a case poisoned by misconduct, prejudice, and willful deceit. Forensic specialists revisited the crime scene evidence. Their findings shredded the prosecution's claims. Tests revealed that the gasoline traces on Frances's clothing were most likely the result of cross-contamination during rescue efforts, not proof that she had handled fuel. Firefighters testified that in chaotic blazes, accelerant vapors could easily cling to victims or rescuers. In contrast, Kenneth's clothing, left mysteriously untested, remained the greatest unanswered question. Why hadn't investigators analyzed the garments of the man who admitted to preparing gas-filled bottles for the fire? Meanwhile, the racist and sexist emails uncovered from prosecutors painted an ugly portrait of bias. Jokes about keeping Asians in their place, remarks mocking Frances's appearance, derogatory slurs aimed at her family. These weren't just tasteless comments, they were evidence of a mindset that had tainted the entire pursuit of justice. Instead of seeking the truth, prosecutors had been determined to convict Frances at all costs. Says John pieced together the puzzle. The case became more than a fight for one woman's freedom, it was a fight against systemic injustice. The Innocence Project filed motion after motion, demanding a retrial, demanding transparency, demanding accountability for Frances. The years dragged on. By now, she had spent over a decade locked away. Branded a murderer, prison life was brutal. Letters from her family painted a picture of resilience, but also of deep sorrow. Her parents aged rapidly under the weight of grief. Their faith in the American justice system shattered. Her siblings campaigned tirelessly, speaking to reporters, rallying community groups, refusing to let her story be forgotten. The Asian American community rallied as well. To many, Frances's ordeal symbolized the dangerous intersection of bias, flawed investigations, and scapegoating. It wasn't just her life at stake, it was a warning of what could happen when prejudice seeped into the foundations of justice. of legal warfare finally began to turn. The tide appeals courts acknowledged that the misconduct was undeniable. The failure to disclose Kenneth's arson attempts, the suppression of exculpatory evidence, the coaching of police witnesses, the destruction or concealment of interrogation notes one by one. The pillars propping up the conviction collapsed, and yet the wheels of justice moved painfully slow. Each hearing, each motion, stretched into months, sometimes years for Frances. Hope flickered but never burned steady. She clung to faith that truth would prevail. But time was a relentless enemy. As the case wound its way through higher courts, Kenneth's life spiraled further into disgrace. Reports surfaced of his smuggling charges overseas, his erratic behavior, his mounting criminal record. To many observers, it was baffling that the justice system had ever chosen to stake its case on him. By the mid-2010s, journalists began digging into the case, exposing the misconduct to the public. Headlines asked the hard questions. Had an innocent woman been condemned while the true arsonist walked free? Documentaries, podcasts, and op-eds reignited outrage. The name Frances Choi became a rallying cry among advocates of wrongful conviction reform. 2020, nearly 2 decades after the fire that destroyed her family, conviction was finally overturned. Judges acknowledged the mountain of misconduct, the buried evidence, the poisoned prosecution. She walked free, but not unscarred. Frances had lost years. She could never reclaim her grandparents and sister were long gone. The world outside had transformed while she remained trapped behind prison walls. Yet, as she emerged, she carried herself with quiet dignity. Her story was no longer just about tragedy, it was about resilience, about the power of truth clawing its way through layers of lies. The case left behind haunting questions. Why had authorities ignored Kenneth's confessions and arson attempts? Why had prosecutors allowed prejudice to guide their every move? How many other cases, hidden in dusty court files, were poisoned by the same misconduct? For the Innocence Project, the fight was far from over. Frances's freedom was a victory, but justice drew, justice remained. Elusive Kenneth had never been held accountable. The prosecutors who mocked and smeared Frances faced no criminal charges for their misconduct, and the scars left on the Choi family could never fully heal in the end. The story of Frances Choi is more than a tale of one wrongful conviction. It's a reminder of how fragile justice can be when clouded by bias and corruption. It's a testament to the years of persistence required to peel back the layers of deceit, and it's a chilling warning when truth is ignored. Entire lives can be stolen in the blink of an eye. Frances's story does not end with her release, though freedom was hers again. It came wrapped in scars, both visible and hidden. 17 years stolen is not a wound that heals quickly. Imagine walking into the world after nearly 2 decades behind bars. Technology transformed, friends scattered, family members aged beyond recognition. The world had moved forward, but Frances had been trapped in a frozen time capsule of injustice. Wrongfully convicted person describes a strange dissonance upon release. Freedom tastes sweet, yet it feels unfamiliar for Frances. The air outside prison walls carried both relief and sorrow. Relief that her innocence was finally recognized. Sorrow for the years she could never reclaim. The settlement of $375 million was a gesture of acknowledgement from the state. Yet money cannot restore birthdays lost, milestones missed, or the innocence of youth erased. That compensation, calculated year by year, measured her stolen life in cold arithmetic. But Frances was determined to rise from the ruins. In interviews after her release, she rarely indulged in anger. She spoke instead of gratitude for her lawyers, for the Innocence Project, for those who believed in her. When the system turned its back, her resilience reflected a quiet defiance, a refusal to let bitterness define her. Her case, however, is more than a personal tragedy. It is a mirror held up to the cracks in our justice system, a reminder that bias, misconduct, and negligence can conspire to destroy a life. Prosecutors painted Frances not just as a criminal, but as a caricature, cold, calculating, unfeeling, using racial stereotypes to sway a jury. They stripped her of her humanity and replaced it with prejudice. Kenneth, the boy who once lived under the same roof, walked free, his contradictions, his motives, his disturbing history of fire setting, all ignored. When convenient, the truth was buried, and Francis was sacrificed to preserve the prosecution's cassette. The truth has a way of clawing its way back to the surface, piece by piece. Year by year, it emerged through hidden emails, forgotten testimony, and the persistence of those unwilling to give up. The storm of lies eventually broke, and Francis was carried out of its wreckage, battered but breathing. And tonight, as we close her chapter, we must ask ourselves, how many more like her remain unseen, locked away, waiting for justice that may never come? The story of Francis Choi is a cautionary tale. It is a warning that no system is immune to corruption, no trial immune to bias, and no verdict immune to error. For Francis, it meant losing the very heart of her youth. For us, it is a reminder to question, to demand fairness, and to look beyond the easy narrative when lives hang in the balance. So, as the rain whispers against the window and the night folds gently around us, remember this: justice is not always truth. Sometimes truth must fight its way through shadows, clawing against time, prejudice, and power. Francis's life is proof that even in the darkest of nights, dawn can break. But it is also a plea that no one else should have to wait 17 years for the morning to come. Until then, we keep listening, keep watching, and keep whispering the stories that must not be forgotten.